All under 16s are now banned from social media in Australia. This includes TikTok, Reddit, and Instagram, but not YouTube, and for a weird and hypocritical reason that I'll get into. But what's revolutionary about this is its planned implementation through a world-first usage of AI-based age verification technology. Technology which, if it works, promises to change how content on the internet is accessed forever. I spent days poring over the legislation and government documents about Australia's plan, and I'm going to tell you why Australia is doing this, exactly how it works, and how soon verification technology like face scanning might be adopted globally. But, understandably, people are worried Australia is moving towards a totalitarian surveillance state. I'll explain where these fears are justified and where they fall flat. First, it's essential to know why Australia would ban all kids from social media, and the reason is grossly disturbing. Australia has seen depression and anxiety rates double amongst young adults, and for women under 15, a tripling of self-harm that ended up damaging enough to require hospitalisation, and a loneliness epidemic that's cut the amount of time spent with friends from 30 hours a week to 10 and a half. But it's not just Australia. All of these harms have grown over the past decade globally. Why? Well, it not so coincidentally started to spike exactly the same time as social media blew up, when we all started getting 24/7 access to it right from our pockets. Social media companies have had unrestricted access to hacking the reward centers of our brain. These companies' obsession with outgrowing each other led them to sink hundreds of billions into research into how to capture as much of the world's attention as possible. This arms race saw the development of notifications, stories, and ultimately the nuclear weapon of attention capture. The doom scroll. Once TikTok mastered their algorithm and interface, they succeeded in making social media as addictive as any other drug out there. And social media users are a lot like drug users. Most people try weed and end up just fine. Some people dive deeper and try a few more like Nangs or LSD, and they're probably fine too. And a minority of people become completely addicted to one of these or something worse, like heroin or meth. For social media, Australia's e-safety commissioner recently found that 84% of 8 to 12-year-olds are using social media. And another study found that for those 10 to 12 kids who have TikTok, they are spending on average 2 hours a day on it. This amounts to 14 hours a week, with many kids certainly far above that threshold. A friend of mine in high school managed to clock up to 12 hours in a single day during the holidays. These people are addicted, and every time they use an app, there's a chance they end up having a bad trip. And this is where social media harms get truly traumatizing. To make sense of how kids can have a bad trip online, let me switch analogies. Imagine you're a parent, and a company promises to deliver a free magazine straight to your kid every morning, with all the world's news and heaps of fun articles for them to read. But said magazine arises entirely through community contribution, with little to no quality control. So, while your kid starts by looking at Bluey comics, soon enough they're finding articles and comments talking about the darker sides of the internet. And before long, with nothing stopping them from turning that page, they can watch women eating each other's feces, people cutting themselves, and even people dying. Would you let them read this magazine? Maybe you think that was hyperbole. It's not. These are just some of the things I found on the internet before I turned 16. A child's morbid curiosity is not to be underestimated. I just wish I'd been at least a bit older before I was exposed to this side of humanity. But that's where Australia's under 16 social media ban comes in. Does it actually stop the gore, hate speech, and disinformation which finds its way on the internet? No. But these social media companies have gone for so long without having to take any responsibility for the content they promote. And regulation needs to start somewhere. So, let's take a deep dive into the legislative details of this ban, and wait until you hear how they decide what platforms fall under the ban. It's worrying, to say the least. Simply put, the legislation creates a legal duty of care on social media companies to verify age and not let anyone under 16 make an account. Failure to do so on a systemic basis risks a whopping $50 million fine. Although, to Meta, with a profit of $39 billion in 2023, Australia will have to hope they don't see this as a cost of doing business. Now, most importantly, let's look at what platforms fall under the ban and why. So the legislation creates a category to target, labelled age-restricted social media platforms, which they define as any service which 1. Enables social interaction between 2 or more people, 2. Allows users to interact with some or all of those people, and 3. Lets users post material on the service. This is scary. This basically includes everything. The definition of material could be as simple as a message, although the legislation provides that the Minister for Communications can determine rules that add to those requirements just listed. And this must be done for the purpose of minimising harms to under 16s. So there are pros and cons to this approach. The obvious con is that if the government decided to go full totalitarian, they could theoretically ban all online services for under 16s where they can interact with anyone online. But that would be like nuking their election chances and is rather extreme given the purpose of the legislation. So, the pro of this is that it allows governments to be adaptable to this rapidly changing industry. So, when the next hyper-addictive and unregulated form of content consumption comes out, they will be ready. So then, who's getting saved from the ban? The government, during debating the bill, announced their intention to create exemptions for certain kinds of apps. And it's their confusing statements about these that is creating the worst problem for this law. On the bright side, they've given a massive exemption to services which provide for genuine interpersonal connections. So messaging platforms like WhatsApp, Discord, and Messenger are safe. Same for gaming apps like Steam. There's no doom scrolling on these apps. Although, where things could go wrong is that there is a risk of inappropriate content distribution, particularly on Discord. All Discord servers are self-moderated. It's quite easy to join a porn server, and a study has also shown that it's commonly used for drug selling in New Zealand. While I think a crackdown on these servers is futile, I do think something should be done so that children can only join a friend's server, or else Discord will be used as a loophole for this law. Additionally, it's also been made clear YouTube will be exempt, for the rather bizarre reason that it doesn't require an account. I do think that YouTube should remain unbanned, as the educational content on it can be extremely beneficial, and providing kids with no online media from which to learn culture on could be harmful itself. But the government's wishy-washy handling of this threatens to undermine their purpose. Because Reddit is also in a similar situation to YouTube, not requiring an account to use, but it is claimed that they will be banned. So does the government intend to force them to have users make an account? Or if not, if other platforms remove the need for an account, is this whole law undermined? Additionally, with the existence of YouTube Shorts, the doom scroll, which this legislation aims to combat, can continue merely through a new platform. If this law hopes to be respected, it needs to be as unexploitable as possible. But all we know currently is that they've named these big 6 as banned, and thereby any similar smaller ones too. We can only watch and see where the government goes from there. But many people are up in arms about their ban too, and think it will end up harming kids even more. But let me explain why that's not the case. Part of this law is preventing children being exposed to mentally harmful content. But critics argue this blanket ban comes at the cost of children accessing mentally healthy content that improves their lives. For a lot of people, the information they saw online at a young age meaningfully impacted who they became as a person, or it allowed them to find communities that made them feel accepted for who they are. I get that, and that is an important benefit of the internet. But the issue is that given the way algorithms feed content to people, there's no telling whether kids will end up on neo-Nazi TikTok or self-improvement TikTok. It's a gamble where the algorithm takes each kid, and the house advantage goes to hate content. Just look at Andrew Tate. His controversial, outright misogynism accomplished the algorithm's only goal of securing more watch time. His content hijacked our deepest emotions and sent people down rabbit holes of increasing outrage, hate, and extremism. This is especially harmful for kids. They don't have the capacity to critically think about the content that's served to them. Instead, they take things at face value. But also, critics needn't worry. Children are not being barred from the whole internet. There is still a plethora of resources online that kids can search for to learn. In fact, there's also an exemption for them in the legislation. And as discussed, YouTube remains available and is a massive platform that can provide the kind of content that these people are worried about losing. And while certainly imperfect, YouTube is notably safer, with a study showing that they dismantled the algorithmic forces which push rabbit hole radicalization, successfully limiting how much harmful misinformation the algorithm feeds people. It still exists, but it mostly receives views from those seeking it out, rather than recommendations. But this next objection is one of the most naive arguments thrown at this proposal. People say this ban precludes young people having a voice. Firstly, I don't know what 12 or 13-year-olds are contributing to the online space that's so important. I know all I was doing was uploading shitty memes and blurry photos of my gaming setup. Even the most famous child activist, Greta Thunberg, was 15 when she started School Strike for Climate. And I don't think the world would have been drastically different if she had to wait one more year to make her posts. And for most kids who need to talk about their problems, they should be talking to someone they trust. A parent, friend, or teacher, rather than gambling on the advice of strangers online. Of course, the opinions of kids are certainly important, but if you care so much about them, then run a government survey and interview them, because they're more likely to be posting TikTok dances than political commentary, where the main viewer base is pedophiles, not concerned citizens. Moving on, ironically, the third issue people have is actually its best feature. Some say it will cause social exclusion, but actually a massive benefit of a blanket ban is that it does the exact opposite. Parents today struggle to not give in to their children's requests to use social media. Jonathan Haidt finds the cause in a collective action trap, where because everyone else is letting their kids on social media, you have to too, or your kid will miss out. But if no one can use these apps, then no one is missing out. And when they become more mature, all those online communities will be there for them to participate in. In the meanwhile, they can use messaging and gaming apps to contact and play with their friends online. But now, let's move on to by far the most technologically revolutionary part of this proposal: how the age verification will work. This technology has the potential to change how we use the internet forever. The Australian government has given responsibility to conduct a trial on age assurance technology to the UK-based association Age Check Certification Scheme. This body of industry experts is tasked with testing three methods of assurance: the classic ones of age verification and parental consent, as well as experimental tech like age estimation, where things get interesting. I'll quickly touch on the first two though, because it's important to know why their flaws have kept online age verification halted for the past 2 decades. Firstly, age verification is handing over some form of government-issued ID to social media companies. Instantly, the presence of privacy issues arises. In the case of porn, which has had many regulation attempts, government ID being the only suitable age assurance method meant users were unwilling to comply. The UK successfully legislated age verification for online porn in 2017, but it was so difficult to effectively implement that they gave up before it was ever properly introduced. Privacy issues plague this form of identification, where most people do not want to hand over sensitive data to these big companies, let alone smaller sites without the same levels of cybersecurity. However, the legislation explicitly states that any data collected for the purpose of age assurance must be deleted immediately after its use has completed. But still, threatening websites with $50 million fines that have already copped $1.3 billion ones for even greater data privacy violations doesn't fill you with too much confidence. So, because of this, Australia's law was amended so that this cannot be the only method of age assurance. Another terrible option is parental consent. This is having an adult confirm the user is above the certified age. This immediately raises a few alarm bells. Firstly, they can't allow any any adult. They will need to figure out a guardian nomination system to prevent exploitation, but they will need to be careful because my older brother for sure would have verified me if he was allowed. And secondly, it could backfire if some parents refuse to give consent, undermining their now 16-year-old's autonomy. So, we move to what promises to change the online space forever: age estimation technology. These technologies have been in development for decades, but recent leaps in AI have meant that they're finally ready to hit the market. The three big contenders here being tested at the trial are voice identification, behavioral pattern checking, and facial scanning. However, regarding voice and behavioral pattern detectors, I'm willing to bet that these trials won't be successful. Voice prediction is shown to be limited due to a lack of correlation between a person's speaking skills and their biological age. It is especially biased against people with low English proficiency, an accent, or a disability. Rolling out such a blatantly inequitable system would be political suicide, and the behavioral prediction path suffers from the structural issue that it requires a data set of a user interacting with the content to make its prediction, the collection of which would defeat the whole purpose. The more promising experimental technology, and where there's a good chance the future is moving, is face scanning. The AI system cannot discern your identity, but is exceptionally good at using biometric scans of your face to determine your age. It's scary. I tried a free one I googled and it got me spot on. Yoti, one of the biggest in the market, promises a true positive rate of 99.2% in predicting 13 to 17-year-olds as under 21. The current trial sets out to see whether it can predict under 16s anywhere near as accurately. Of course, this leads to the central question: is that effective enough? How concerned should we be for that 0.8% failure rate? Undoubtedly, no technology will ever be 100% perfect. Even IDs can be faked. In fact, in America, where the legal drinking age is 21, 20% of college students get fake IDs, and only a third ever get caught. But we haven't seen America give up on regulating alcohol because 16% of college kids get away with drinking. I don't see why we would give up on this because 0.8% of kids find their way onto these platforms. What's more likely to stop this initiative is a lot of people's cynicism towards this kind of technology being adopted universally in online spaces. But in its favor is how reliable and easy enough this technology is to use. The same as how Spotify made music piracy redundant, the ease of which you can verify your age will make circumventing regulation not worth it for businesses. Until now, governments have been too scared to crack down on platforms which barely try to protect children from their inappropriate content. Some of the US states' recent attempts to regulate Pornhub just caused Pornhub to block its services in those 13 states. Pornhub claimed it was because of the privacy risks to users who needed to hand over sensitive documents. It was too risky because security breaches are almost inevitable. Thus, the move to unidentifiable age estimation makes this form of regulation much more stomachable. However, Pornhub also makes a great point that for porn, it is very easy to find alternative non-compliant platforms. One study estimates that there are over 4 million porn sites available. Regulating every website on their own platform would be impossible. Verification thus may need to move to a device level, but either way, for social media regulation, the appearance of smaller alternatives actually isn't a problem, because the benefits of social media occur from a network effect that isn't present when the app has little users. Of course, while facial scanning may be effective, it is difficult to imagine people won't find a way to circumvent it. The easiest to imagine being having an older friend or relative scan their face for you. If it's only a one-time requirement, this exploitation will make the whole system redundant. Thus, any effective mechanism would require a scan every time. So, a government ID would be necessary for a fully confident verification. Which takes us back to the start. Or does it? Because Australia is actually introducing a new, anonymized, token-based identification system, which promises anonymity and accuracy. Australia's new digital ID aspires to be the pinnacle of ID-less verification. It involves using what they call a trust exchange, which is an accredited third-party provider which verifies your government documents. Then, when, for example, a service like a bar needs to verify your age, you merely scan a QR code and can choose to send only the necessary information that you're over 18. The benefit of the token system is that it's closer to a thumbs up than actual personal information. So, if a company is hacked, the hackers get nothing useful. So, if Instagram were hacked, all they would get is that you were verified as over 16, not your actual driver's license. And for other services like a bank, they would be given your legal name and date of birth, but not something like your passport number. While this system may sound good, this is where the tinfoil hat came on for many. There were originally fears that the digital ID sought to be linked to a government department, giving them information on all your whereabouts and activities. But this was unfounded. While you will be able to use a public provider, the private sector is an option too. And on paper, they've got a pretty good screening system too. Accreditation application requirements outline extensive checks on any criminal and private legal disputes of all high-level staff, the company's history following privacy laws, system security testing, and effective encryption mandates. Additionally, ID providers are not permitted to use the data you give them for anything but the primary purpose, aka verifying certain information to the businesses you consent to. Of course, the security of these providers cannot be guaranteed, but neither can any other private companies. As seen with the Optus and Medibank data breach, both compromising about 10 million people's personal information. This system's decentralized approach across many organizations helps limit the extent of breaches when they do occur, instead of exposing nearly half of Australia. So, where is the future heading then? It appears to be towards the adoption of these anonymized age and identity verification systems. Australia is leading the world in trialing and implementing biometric age identification and tokenized information verification. What a mouthful. What we'll be seeing is attempts to more tightly regulate the current wild west of the online spaces. While the internet isn't the anarchy it was in the late 2000s anymore, there are still many risks to the kids who don't know how to mentally deal with the addictive nature of these apps and aren't ready to see some of the content that's prevalent on them. In the end, the world will be watching to see if Australia will actually be able to do what many countries have tried and failed before.